From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melithopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. There is a lot of interest in creating pollinator habitat on roadsides, but it is difficult. A roadside is not necessarily the best place to try and grow plants, and in addition, there can be concerns around plants and agriculture that's bordering those roads that requires a little bit of nuance, and that's where our guests this week come in. I'm really pleased to have on the show Marie Vicksta, who's a conservation planner with Yamhill Soil and Water Conservation District, but also Michael O'Loughlin. And some of you in Oregon know Michael because he's kind of everywhere. He was actually awarded the Behind the Scenes Master Gardener Award because he really does have his fingers in a lot of things. He's a grass seed grower. He works with the Oregon Bee Atlas. He's a master gardener. He serves on many committees. Anyways, in this episode, we're going to hear about this great combination of soil and water conservation districts working with, someone like Michael and counties to come up with pollinator roadside establishment trials that might set the stage for broader adoption of pollinator plantings on roadsides. It's a really great example of how things can come together at the grassroots in a very practical and cost-effective way. So I'm just going to be quiet and let's just go straight into this conversation with Marie Vicksta from the Yamhill Soil and Water Conservation District and Michael O'Loughlin this week on Pollination. Okay, in past episodes, we've talked about soil and water conservation districts, and in my mind, I'm maybe in some of our listeners, the division between soil and water conservation districts and things like the federal NRCS. How do these two things come together, Marie? What is a soil and water conservation district, and how does it sort of interface with these federal programs?
Yeah, you're seeing us in the wild is what you're saying. A lot of the districts around the state have quite small staffs. We at our district in Yamhill County have about 7.5 staff members, 3 of which are technical staff members that go out to people's properties and walk the land with them, have conversations about what their goals are. And focus on, things like water quality, water quantity, habitat restoration. Some of the districts work a lot more on forest management, those that are on, we do a little bit as well, especially oak restoration and oak management. We're set up to be the local voice on conservation. We have a board that's locally elected. Often I'll have friends call me or text me before elections. Who is this district director that I'm voting for? But they are, longtime residents often who have neighbors and they talk to their neighbors about issues and they provide feedback on our work in the field. And then a lot of districts have very close ties with both the Farm Service Agency and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. In our situation or our case, we are co-located with both of those federal agencies who are excellent partners, both as technical resources, but they also provide a lot of financial resources to folks. And in, again, cases like ours, where we don't have a very large tax base, we rely on them quite a lot for funding for the conversations that we're having with landowners about things they'd like to accomplish. And the goal of the Natural Resources Conservation District or Conservation Service is to assist landowners to implement those goals and provide cost share and incentives for that kind of work.
Fantastic. So the soil water conservation districts are really rooted in the county. And I guess the thing that I'm kind of curious about for Yamhill Soil and Water Conservation District, what are some of the key priorities real specific to your county?
Water quality is always an issue. We're a very predominantly agriculturally driven county. And with that, comes some of the concerns that citizens and, the landowners and land managers that we're working with about how to mitigate some of the things that are going on and keep the soil where it's supposed to be, and not end up in our streams and lakes and rivers. And oak restoration is another. We have a staff member who's pretty much fully engaged only on oak restoration and helping private landowners with that work. We have the endangered Bender's blue butterfly within our county. So that work directly correlates with recovery efforts with that species. We also are unique in our county that we do a lot of work on actual private land protection. So we're one of the few districts in the state that actually owns and manages its own property. And that property is purchased often for protection of the wildlife benefits that might provide. But also we have property that's looking at agricultural land use protection. So I would say those are the main focus that our district is looking at. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. I can see how all of those have some implication for pollinators, but specifically the oak preservation and or restoration and Fender's blue, but also just so many pollinators in those fragments of native oak habitat. A really important pollinator conservation initiative.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I did invite you and Michael on the show today because of a very specific pollinator. I'm very excited about it. Initiative that's going in Yamhill County with pollinators, really trying to see how you can install some pollinator habitat on a county road. Can you give me a sense of how this project came about? What was the genesis of the idea for this project?
Yeah, so this is another cooperative effort that our district's been engaged in with not only the county public works, but also some concerned citizens and other local partners like the Greater Yamhill Watershed Council to work on vegetation management along the roadsides. And how that work is being done by the county. And that partnership has grown into some work focusing on weed work and weed management along the roadsides, but also wanting to look at erosion prevention. Specifically, if you drive around Yamhill County very often, you'd notice that a lot of the roadside ditches are completely vacant of vegetation. And this is a pretty typical practice, especially when there's seed crops being grown adjacent to the county road. It essentially needs to be a buffer for the seed crop. So what we're trying to do is work with a mix that would not give producers or farmers any concern about a seed purity, but would also provide some of the benefits that we're interested in. Those ditches are directly a conduit of stormwater in the rainy season, so could definitely could use the vegetation in order to protect that the ditch. But when I approached Michael about this project, I was like, if we're going to try to put in something for erosion control, why aren't we thinking about something that also could benefit pollinators on top of that and have kind of a multiple benefits solution? So we put our heads together, and Michael, of course, jump in whenever you want, but put our heads together about what that might look like and what some of those goals would be, and talked to a lot of people and got a lot of opinions about what we could look at planting, and came to a mix that we thought would hopefully be pretty successful in roadside ditches that are along his property line, that would provide those pollinator benefits, but also eventually prevent erosion as well.
Michael, I remember, so Michael, you're a seed grower, and I remember you giving a talk at, we had a summit here, a Pacific Northwest Pollinator Summit, where you talked about the real need to, when thinking about pollinator habitat, integrating it in with farm concerns. So tell us a little bit about this from your perspective. I imagine as a seed grower yourself, making sure that you don't have weed seeds is important, but also as a conservationist, a real early adopter in terms of farm conservation, you probably had some thoughts on how to do this.
Yeah, I think, a lot of times, in theory, putting in habitat next to farmland sounds like, a perfect solution to landowners helping with ecosystems. But in reality, a farm is a business, and that has some constraints, financial and as well as labor constraints that sometimes when you're putting in habitat, it actually works against those efforts. So finding a balance between those two is what I like to do. I'm willing to give up a little bit of land to do it. But at the same time, I don't want to create a headache because, quite frankly, everybody's busy. And a lot of this stuff just sucks some resources at the wrong time of year. So when Marie and I were talking about this project, she and I worked on an earlier project, a beetle bank in the middle of one of the fescue fields. And that beetle bank contains quite a few, 5 specific forbs that we were testing for pollinators as well. So then when Marie and I were talking about these roadside areas, we thought we could probably, with enough research and just a little bit of, hey, you guys have to trust us. We are going to work through the system and test the system out. We thought we could come up with a fairly decent erosion control mix for the side of the road that wouldn't create a contamination in the fescue fields, and I think we came up with a pretty good mix.
Now, I imagine, it's one thing growing plants in cultivated areas where you've got really good weed management and the seed bank has been depleted and so on and so forth. But I imagine a ditch is probably the hardest, has the highest weed pressure of any place on earth, and also just erosion and compaction. It's not a very friendly place to try and grow anything. Can you tell us a little bit about how you are approaching the establishment part of this project?
I think that is a great question. If I were to do this as a farmer, I would fluff up the seed bed. I would eradicate weeds for a couple of years. I would nuke it. And then with a sterile kind of ground, as far as we could do that and getting rid of most of the seed bank, then I would plant it and then I would irrigate it and off we go. But that's not what this seed trial is about. It is literally, could we come up with a mix that could be done in a normal situation? So Public Works, the county's been great. They came out and they graded the side of the road where we are testing these seed mixes. And they did it with no instructions about how to make it like perfect for seeds. This is just, you do it how you would normally do it, which means that we are well aware that there is a seed bank in there. And we know that there are some fairly pervasive weeds in there, teasel, some blackberry, a mustard, or radish, I should say. There's a couple that are fairly tenacious that part of this trial is going to be, in a normal situation, can we come up with a seed mix that could either outcompete and or at least hold their own against the weeds that are going to be there naturally.
Well, tell us a little bit about that plant selection. It sounds like you've really thought about some plants that could be competitive and established. Tell us a little bit about that plant selection process.
I'm going to let Marie first jump in on this one. She did a lot of the legwork on not just the seed mixes, but also the seeding rate. So Marie, you take this first, and then I'll jump in at the end.
Sure. And I will say that we're definitely in, I wouldn't say uncharted territory, but there's a lot to be learned about planting, especially natives in the roadside. I know ODOT has an initiative to try to increase pollinator habitat along federal highway or state highways. And in fact, there was a road project, the Dundee bypass, that they did a native planting in that area. And but we don't have the budget that ODOT has. So that was another consideration when we're talking about seed selection, is we were trying to find something that would be common enough that our public works department would be able to find it very readily. So what we decided on is there was some opinion on whether or not we should combine native flowering like forbs with non-native grasses. But we're trying it out. It's a small area, and so the grass species that we're using is a creeping red fescue, which is a pretty common erosion control grass that would be planted after any sort of ground disturbance. And then we're in the beetle bank. We had a lot of success with the berry leaf Phacelia, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with the Lacey Phacelia, but the berry leaf Phacelia is actually the native variety that we have here in Oregon. Mm-hmm. The other nice thing about that particular species is it's pretty tough. It is found in some pretty, I've seen it in the gorge, and it's in these rough, like rocky soils. So we thought, perhaps that would do pretty well along the roadside. And of course, it was already in the farm and doing great. So we were able to collect local, basically collect seed that we had planted at the farm already. Blue Gilia, which is another, is an annual that there's been a lot of research coming out of Oregon State about the potential, or the amount of pollinator benefit that particular plant is potentially has. And then yarrow variety that is a low growing variety, and yarrow is another very tough plant. And hopefully, with two perennials, an annual, and then the creeping red fescue, we're hoping to have pretty good establishment, in which actually Michael shared some photos of some of the Phacelias already starting to germinate and come up. So that's, great to see already.
So how did it go? How did it, tell us a little bit about the details. When did this get established? When did this start? And, how are you going to evaluate it?
So we started, as far as talking about this was last year, because Michael had to contact basically we had to stop spraying the roadside, at least it's very common to maintain that denuded ditch side to use a pre-emergent. So basically something that you put down on the ground to try to prevent any establishment of new weeds. Of course, a lot of those pre-emergents have quite a bit of hang time in the soil. So we didn't want to seed anything into the ditch and basically waste our time because there was already some sort of pre-emergent acting on any of the potential growth. And then this fall, I'll let Michael jump in, but we coordinated with the Public Works Department about when we would get the seeding done, and I'll let Michael take it from here.
Yeah, so we probably, in all honesty, started a little late on the seeding. I probably would have wanted to go maybe closer to a September, but this was an extremely dry year. We wanted a little bit of moisture on the soil first before we seeded, just to get some germination going. So we did start a little late, but that's kind of how this whole project is. It's like, if the county's going to adopt this, it's not going to always be the perfect situation. So Public Works came in, like I said, and graded that. The next step was to lay down the seed. In a normal situation, if the county were going to do this, they would take this seed mix and put it into a hydroseeder and then spray it on the side of these roadside ditches. In our case, because we're doing small plots, we had to simulate that in that with these various seeding rates that we're testing, each plot was actually hand seeded. We spread it by hand, and then they hydroseeded over the top of it with the fescue. So the forbs went down first, and then the fescue went on top with the hydroseeding mix. And that's the only way we could do it and get these separate plots so we could actually evaluate the three different seeding rates that we're testing.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. So you've got these different seeding rates, and you're going to evaluate them over time. What do you think you're going to see? What are these plots going to look like over time?
Well, I'll talk about the specific the specific species that we put in there and what we expect. But this is Mother Nature, so who knows? So the bluegilia is an annual. That is in that mix because we want some blooms the first year out. Because I think from a public perception, if this is going to be used, the blooms would be a good first year bonus. But we have a feeling that bluegilia will drop out of that mix eventually. It'll just be out competed. It is a bee magnet. It's been studied quite a bit. Aaron Anderson, who I know you've had on this program, tested that flower and found it to be very effective. It's a late spring, early summer bloomer. So we think that one's going to drop out. The yarrow competes very well. It competes with other weeds and should stay in the mix and maybe at some point become dominant. And then the Phacelia, which we've tested on this beetle bank we have, tends to be a good weed suppressor. So it tends to out-compete the weeds, not just cohabitate with them. So that one, which is kind of our middle of the season bloomer, should also become dominant. So the hope is the fescue, which is going to spread quickly, is going to stay. And then the two really hardy forbs, the perennials, will be a dominant part of the mix, and the bluegilia will drop out eventually. That's the theory.
Well, I suppose if the theory gets shown in practice like this, this all works. This is going to be a lot of interest to the county and I imagine surrounding counties. How do you see this sort of rolling out? Let's say it does turn out to be a smashing success. How will this potentially lead to, more county roads being planted into pollinator habitat?
So we're working still very closely with Public Works, and in fact, I've been on probably half a dozen site visits. We wrote this particular project up in our newsletter, and people are really interested in what they can do. And it's I've worked for the district for 10 years, and I've written dozens of newsletter articles. I've never had people contact me like this about how they can help and how they can participate, which is awesome. And we just want to keep working in cooperation with Public Works to try to, basically have this be business as usual. If the mix is cheap enough and it doesn't modify or need any modification to their existing ditch maintenance protocols, I would say there's a case to make it your everyday mix that you're using. And hopefully that spills over into other counties just by people driving through and, hopefully saying how beautiful our ditches look.
Yeah, why can't Benton County have nice ditches too?
Exactly.
Well, I am so excited to hear about this initiative. It's really fantastic. But let's take a quick break. I'm sure you guys have some pretty diverse skill sets. Our listeners are probably really curious to know how you answer the 3 questions that we ask all our guests. So let's take a quick break. We'll be back in just 1 sec. Okay, we are back. So, book recommendation. Do you have a book that you want our listeners to know about? I'm so curious what they're going to be. Marie, let's start with you.
So I'm picking an oldie but a goodie and going with Pojar, the Plants of the Native or Pacific Northwest. It's a great plant ID book, and I think if you're at all interested in plants and want to learn more, it's a great resource.
What an excellent suggestion. I remember seeing that book back when I was a graduate student in Simon Fraser University in British Columbia. It's fantastic. It's an all-weather book. It really lays out everything clearly for you. Real great pictures and some line drawings. Fantastic suggestion. Awesome. Well, let's turn our attention to Michael. Michael, you must have like one heck of a pollinator library. What's your recommendation?
I've got a few of them. I mean, I'm going to go with probably the standard answer that's been very popular on pollination, and that is bees in your backyard. I'm not I don't have a doctorate in anything. It is such a great book for people who just generally love pollinators, as well as people that want to learn more. It's got kind of both sides of it. It's just that it's one of the best books I've ever seen done on native bees. So that would be the one I'd go to.
Before you became a bee nut, because you head up the Yamhill Oregon Bee Atlas team, and you're also on the advisory committee of the Oregon Bee Atlas. Was that a book that kind of got you started, or did it go even further back before that book?
Interesting. I don't think that book was published until after I joined the Bee Atlas. So I was flying blind until the book. I think you guys got me into this. So I don't know quite how what got me to drink the Kool-Aid, but definitely that book has brought me along.
I'm so excited as well because I'm looking. It's 20 days from, I think, today. I'm going to have Olivia Messenger Carroll on the show, and they've got 2 new books coming out. The first one's going to be on the bees of the eastern U.S., and then they've got the bees of the western U.S. I am so excited for those books.
If they're anything like the bees in the backyard, I am actually going to get both, even though I live in the West.
Me too, actually. Okay, so go-to tool. You guys are outside people working with your hands and doing real practical projects. Do you have a go-to tool for the kind of work that you do that you want our listeners to know about?
Yeah, I have to say Dibble tool. We do a lot of plantings, and particularly if you have plantings with any sort of plug, which often grasses and sometimes forbs will be in a plug form. It's a long, it almost looks like a shovel handle, but then there's a sharp tip that's weighted. Well, sharp is probably not the right word, but it's a pointed, that's like basically, you shove it into the ground and it basically creates a hole that's perfect for your plug, and you can put the plug in and kind of, peel, the dirt back in around it, and it makes, for very quick, planting.
You're the first person to recommend a Dibble tool on this show. So let me get this straight. Is it have like a place for your boot to sort of put pressure on, or is it just the hand? You just got to kind of ram it into the soil. How does it work?
I've seen both, but yeah, definitely often we'll have like a little, step for your boot, maybe 2 or 3 inches that you can like use the weight of the tool to put it into the ground, and then kind of use the weight of your body to finish the job. Especially after we did planting at Michael's Beetle Bank, I was really thanking my, I had a couple of dibble tools to make quick work of that.
Fantastic. Wow. Okay. Well, Michael, do you have anything that can beat the dibble tool?
Well, yeah, I do, because mine actually does have a sharp point. I always carry a hori hori with me, a Japanese knife. It is great for actually planting plugs as well, but it's great for digging small little trenches to put pan traps and vein traps into. It's got a saw edge that you can cut string with if you're trying to repair stuff. It's just my go-to tool for weeding and pruning and whatever else I need it for.
You could probably open a can of beans with it too, if you needed to.
I'm sure you can. And I have literally buried mine for like 3 months at a time. I keep losing it whenever I'm planting potatoes or something. And then I'll find it months later. I'll dig it up again, and I just keep going with it.
That's a great image. Well, we've come around to the last question. I'm sad to see this episode end, but I want to ask you guys, do you have a favorite? Marie, let's start with you. Do you have a favorite pollinator species? When you see it, you're just like, I love that thing.
Of course, at least our office has all been working from home, and it's great to be able to see more about what's going on in my own backyard. And I have a resident Anna's hummingbird that is just beautiful, and I'm so glad that I'm able to have kind of a bright splash of color throughout the day. And I know how important they are for pollinators as a pollinator. And it's just been a joy to have.
They are amazing. I particularly like it when they, we've got some over here, and they go to the feeder, and then they land on the and they've got drops of nectar hanging off their beak. They're just like, I just really enjoyed that.
Yeah. How
about yourself, Michael? Do you have of the many pollinators that come across your desk, is there one that you have a favorite?
Wow. I don't have a favorite necessarily. I think that changes. Let me put it this way. It changes all the time depending on what I get exposed to and what, as part of the Oregon Bee Atlas, I'm catching out there. I would say probably this year, my favorite has been Triepiolus concavus, which is a large Triepiolus. It's a cuckoo bee of Sphaestra. Very cool bees, jet black with this really kind of this tan to yellow pressed hairs on it that make a great pattern on the back. So I'm going with that Triepiolus.
That is so cool. Whereabouts in the state would one find one?
Oh boy, those are east of the Cascades. And where basically just hunt down Sphaestras, population of Sphaestras, and you'll find the Triepiolus there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. I'm really, really thrilled to hear about this initiative, and I know people across the U.S. are going to be thinking about this kind of approach to making very cost-effective pollinator habitat to solve a problem in terms of soil erosion and keeping weeds out. Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and we'll be happy to be back to give a report.
Absolutely.
I'm counting on it. Thank you so much for listening. The show is produced by Quinn, Sin, and Neil, who's a student here at OSU in the New Media Communications program, and the show wouldn't even be possible without the support of the Oregon Legislature, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, and Western SARE. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on the website, which is at pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's several ways to connect with me. The first one is you can visit the website and leave an episode-specific comment. You can suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. But you can do the same things on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook by visiting the Oregon Bee Project. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.